Welcome to Terrible Lizards, a podcast about dinosaurs with Dr. David Hone and Izzy Lawrence.
On this week's episode, we'll be talking about Dave's new book, Uncovering Dinosaur Behaviour, and you can get 30% off Uncovering Dinosaur Behaviour by Dave Hone. Use code UDB30. That is the letter U, the letter D, the letter B, all in capitals, and the number 30 when you buy direct from Princeton University Press. There is a link in the show notes. This offer is available until the 30th of December 2024. Rawr. Hello everybody and welcome to Terrible Lizards. It is the autumn, it is snowing outside, I have no idea. We're recording this episode a little bit early, so I haven't actually read the thing that we're going to be talking about, have I, Dave? Because this is a special episode talking about your new book. And before you say anything, I should say that this is Dr. Dave Hone from Queen Mary University.
Would it make a massive difference compared to other episodes where you haven't read what we're talking about either?
I mean, no, but I could, pretend I had read it and then be like, oh yeah, I don't know. It might have helped because it might have pictures in, and I like pictures.
Yes, it does have pictures in. I can happily assure you on this front. I actually got an email this morning going, your not proof copy, your advanced copy as author is on its way. What's your address? And it's like, well, same address you sent everything else to.
You might have moved, Dave.
But anyway, I have a new book out with the time at which this podcast is coming out. It'll be out in a week, 10 days, something like that. So it's due out on, I think, the 5th of November. So yeah, fireworks night, someone pointed out for the Brits. And yes, it's called Uncovering Dinosaur Behaviour. It was supposed to be called Dinosaur Behaviour, but that title got nicked by another book by the same company, just to annoy me. So yes, Uncovering Dinosaur Behaviour by Princeton Press. It is, I was going to say, available in all good bookshops. I don't know how available it will be. It is available for order on Amazon. I've seen it. You can order it directly from Princeton. I'm sure there will be other places that you can get it online.
Most people, if you go into your local bookshop, they will order it for you. And it's really good to support local bookshops because we love local bookshops.
That's also true as well. But if you want to order an advanced copy, it is available for advanced ordering, which is nice. The title is a bit of a giveaway. So it is a book on dinosaur behaviour. Anyone who's somehow staggeringly managed to listen to nearly 100 episodes of us wittering on about dinosaurs and related Mesozoic stuff will know that this is an area I'm very keen on and I'm quite passionate about, and I think I've definitely talked in the past about how I think it's often been handled quite badly by paleontologists as well as other people trying to interpret it and do it. And so while I don't think I've written a polemic, I really don't think I have, it's definitely supposed to be a bit of both a kind of state of the art and where I think we're going wrong and where I think we should be going and what we should be doing with this kind of stuff going forwards.
I just want you to tell some of the 8-year-olds who listen to this podcast, because you're there, guys, I know you're there and you're very cool, what polemic means.
I was going to say a diatribe, but that may not help very much. That was the first thing that sprang to mind. It's not just a work where I just complain about everyth's say.
But it's you, Dave. We want you to complain about stuff. We like you complaining about stuff.
I said the word just. let me reassure you and any listeners that there will be some, oh my God, if we really, that's what people think, if they actually looked at this data and looked at this evidence and seen how this works in the real world. Anyway, those who have been kind/generous/foolish enough to buy my previous books, I will say this is a bit different in a couple of ways, which is worth pointing out because I'm always eternally grateful to people who do buy my books, but also I've been frustrated in the past as someone who buys and reads a lot of books when books aren't what you think they are. And I honestly think this is actually quite a common problem with quite a lot of science books and even dinosaur books, where it's described as the da-da-da of dinosaurs, and you get it and you go, oh yeah, the last chapter is on that subject and the rest of the book really isn't. So compared to my other adult books, so the Tyrannosaur Chronicles and the Future of Dinosaurs / How Fast Did T-Rex Run, depending on where you read it, so it's rather slimmer. It's only about maybe 2/3 of the word count. So it's not some tiny little volume, but it is also not a massive thick one. So those were something like 80 to 90,000 words, and this is something like 50 to 60, with really an extensive reference list. So that takes up quite a few pages at the end. So it's not as long. It is much more in-depth. So I consider this what I'd call grey literature. So it is not primary literature. It is not classic scientific work with incredible detail and all the rest of it, but nor is it classic pop science where every single term is explained and everything is boiled down, and we start with dinosaurs first evolved in the Triassic. Now, the Triassic isn't a period of time in Earth's history that we do. No, it assumes you know this stuff. So I was told to write.
If you listen to the podcast regularly, you'll be fine.
Oh,
reading
then I think you'll be fine. Yeah, but it's again, I know I had my 8-year-old godson read my Tyrannosaur Chronicles, and I'm like, that's way too tough for an 8-year-old. And actually, he obviously struggled with bits of it, but he got through it fine. There's no way he'd get through this. It's too dense, it's too technical. Annoyingly, the publishers made me take out the full references, so it's only got numbered references, but it does mean that there are innumerable sentences that say, studies have shown, reference 27, 28, that X correlates with Y, reference 29, and therefore we can conclude that this is genuinely there. So there's I think 400 references in total, which for a relatively slimline volume is really quite a lot. It's relatively dense text to read. It is relatively technical, both on the dinosaur side and the animal behaviour side, because again, as people who've listened will know, where I think we often fall down is paleontologists don't seem to know a lot about animal behaviour, which if you're then trying to interpret the behaviour of dinosaurs, I think is something of a problem. And I'm hardly a specialist in behaviour myself, but I've tried to work some of that stuff in. I mean, I've written an introduction to it, and I said, look, this is... The book has a real risk of falling not even between 2 stools, but falling between 3 or 4 stools, because I'm trying to make it dinosaur-y enough, or at least I'm trying to get enough animal behaviour in that paleontologists can read it and go, I see where he's coming with the animal behaviour and ecology side of things, and we need to do more of this. I'm also trying to make it dinosaur-y enough that there are animal behaviourists and ethologists out there and ecologists who've tried to do some dinosaur stuff, and then they fall foul of the other problem, which is they don't know anything about dinosaurs, whilst also trying to make it general enough for, again, probably not very young readers or those who have very little knowledge, i.e. not the kind of audience we're talking to today, but there will be the man on the street who can read this, though it might be a bit of a fight. And so trying to make it in-depth enough for professionals but accessible enough for lay readers means you run the risk of professionals going, yes, I know all of this. Why is there a chapter explaining this basic stuff to me? While a non-professional is reading it going, this is really complicated and I'm lost already. Happily, the feedback from a variety of people who've had a look at it so far suggests that I have not done that. So I want to thank up front the 3 academics who basically read and commented on the whole thing for me. So Kerry Woodruff had a look at it. I think we mentioned Kerry before at some point, but he's a sauropod worker, and of course I don't know my sauropods that well, so I wanted him to look at it. Andy Farkey, who's a ceratopsian worker, had a look at it, because again, I know my theropods very well. I'm very confident on the theropod stuff, but it's nice to have someone check the ornithischian side of things, and he's an ornithischian worker. And Dave Shucker, who we definitely won't have mentioned before, but Dave is a behaviourist, so he's an ethologist, and Dave works on insects mostly, but he has a background kind of just, I like dinosaurs are cool. So he's great, because he's someone who knows just a little bit about dinosaurs, but actually not very much, but he's also a proper professional ethologist. And so having his feedback on it was really, really important, going, no, this is pulling stuff up and putting it in a behavioural context that someone like me would want if I was trying to understand this stuff.
Why didn't you send it to me? Why didn't you want my opinion? What's wrong with my opinion? I could have helped. I could have been a man on the street thing. I could have said, what do you mean by polemic? I could have said that in your thing.
Yeah.
Could have helped.
I mean, do you want the full-ons?
I get what you mean, though. It is very hard to pitch to an audience that you're not sure, that it should be a very general audience, but also it's quite niche in and of itself. So it's a difficult thing to pitch. Yeah,
I mean, I think probably the best analogy for those who have read their way through various dinosaur books, so something like The Complete Dinosaur, whose 3rd edition is due almost any week, I think, at the time of recording. I mean, supposed to come out ages ago. Or something like Mark Hallett and Matt Wadel's Sauropods book, or something like Mark Mitton's Pterosaur book. They're quite heavily referenced and they're quite technical, but also if you hit them and you really don't know those subjects and you read through carefully and you take your time, I think you'll get an awful lot out of them. That's the kind of level and approach that I was taking with this, so that there might be a few points of reference there.
So do you want to tell us what's in it, Dave? Because I want to know what's in it.
So it starts with basically an introduction to dinosaurs, for people who don't know that, an introduction to animal behaviour, for people who don't really know that. Again, trying to get those two very different audiences up to speed, or if you don't really know either, covering both. And then really what it mostly is so Steve Brasati looked at it for Princeton. So he was, we had a couple of formal referees on the book outside of the guys I just named who looked at it for me. And his comment was great because it's exactly what I thought I'd done. And so it was nice to have someone independent say, this is what it reads like. He said it reads like a series of review papers. And that's exactly what I'd intended it to be, where each chapter largely deals with a separate subject of dinosaur behaviour or behavioural ecology, because the two, and even straight ecology. So it's called behaviour, but it merges all kinds of stuff like feeding and diet, because of course that feeds in. So there's, I'm now trying to remember, but there's one on feeding, there's one on combat, there's one on reproduction, everything from mating all the way up to rearing offspring. There's one about movement, because of course that actually feeds in, are you fast, are you slow, can you accelerate well, can you turn, and all the things that feeds into that. There's one on communication, which then feeds into the sexual selection stuff, which I've talked about many, many times. And of course, in various places, those all intersect, because if you're something like Tyrannosaurus with a dirty great head full of teeth, that's very important for prey capture and feeding, but it's also pretty important for fighting other tyrannosaurs, and we know they did that too. So of course you've got those intersections. And of course, why are they fighting other tyrannosaurs? Well, they're probably doing it as part of social communication or dominance or sexual selection or trying to find mates or territory control. And so it is obviously, you try and get these really nice narrow topics, and then you get about halfway through and you go, probably all of this should be in the chapter that's going to come 3 chapters later. But at the same time, I kind of have to set it up here, because otherwise it's weird that it does fit. But yeah, the majority of the books are kind of 2/3 of the main text is, these review chapters. So kind of like, what is the problem? What is the state of the art? What do we know? How do we know it? Where does that evidence come from? Then every chapter finishes with a little kind of what I think we can do next, as in, we've got this kind of data, we've got this kind of understanding, but here's a gap in our knowledge. And if we fill that gap, we might be able to combine it with this information and tackle that problem.
Hey, PhD students.
Yeah, there is that kind of stuff going on. And then every chapter at the end has basically a case study where I delve in more depth into something. So the communication one, I did the Protoceratops signaling. The reproduction one, I did Myosaura and the hadrosaur nests. For feeding, I did Spinosaurus, because obviously I've done a lot of that.
I'm only interested in combat, Dave. I'm only interested in combat.
Oh, now I can't remember. Was it
Tyrannosaurs biting each other, or was it Triceratops clashing into each other?
I think I actually went for Pachycephalosaurs on that one. With the headbutting. Yeah. Oh, no, it was, I tell a lie, it was the Ankylosaurs with the intraspecific combat hypothesis on tail clubbing and then shoving in the Nodosaurs. So yeah, I tried to spread it out and not just do theropods. It's what I work on, it's what I know best, but also, it's also what's been very well studied. As ever, there is this gravitation towards big theropods when it comes to research. It is something that happens, and therefore there's only so much you can do about it when that's where a lot of the literature goes. But yeah, there's the sauropods were feeding, so I did the high and low feeding stuff in sauropods. So they get in there. Yeah, we got signaling in Protoceratops, got the Myosaurs, got Ankylosaurs. So I did manage to spread it around a bit, but there might be pack hunting in Dromaeosaurs and prey capture in Spinosaurs, and T-Rex ends up at the start as a kind of gestalt of, what's the dinosaur we probably know the most about as a model for our understanding. So it is quite sexy theropody, which on the one hand I feel guilty about, on the other hand I do want people to buy the book. So having a little bit of that seemed appropriate.
If you really want to do it, you just needed to include like a chart at the end showing like the top trumps of battle and who'd beat what, just to keep us all happy, really. Just
to annoy. I mean, I wish you'd said that while I was still writing it, because if I could have snuck that into the appendix, then the next time anyone asked me who would win in a fight between, I've actually got a reference. See Home 2024, page 451. Here is the answer for who would win.
We could actually do some sort of top trumpsy type. We could work it out in a sheet. We could just do it.
I just want to write a list, but because it's published, it then counts, and I'll just cite myself.
I know, but we can publish it on the podcast website. It'd be great. Who beat up who the fastest, and when? That'd be lovely. I think maybe a project once we finished all of our blooming books.
Yeah, well, so the next one, I'm editing the text at the moment and going over the artwork for that. So that's for a future podcast, definitely.
I feel no pain. I currently have 4 books due in at the end of the year, and I'm working on 2 right now, and I have another 2 to do. Yay!
But you haven't started yet?
Yeah. You'll be fine.
Excellent.
Everything's great.
Fine. Talking of art editing, so that is the other thing to say is, on the one hand, as I say, it's a bit more slender, it's a bit more technical, but in terms of bang for your buck, what it does have is a lot of artwork and a lot more illustrations and photographs than my previous books. So I was able to persuade Princeton to cough up quite a large sum of money. So Gabriel Agerto, who we've definitely mentioned on multiple times and is a superlative artist, has contributed a ton of art. So there's a colour section with, off the top of my head, 16 colour images in it. About 4 of them are his that have been published before in various places, and all the others are new. So there's like a dozen new commissioned pieces of artwork just for this book, including the cover, which I've shown a handful of people, and I think is one of the best things he's ever done. And it's extremely good, and I won't spoil it for anyone who hasn't seen it.
Well, it'll probably be the artwork for this episode, Dave. So.
Oh, that's true. Okay, then I'll talk a little bit about. So it's a massive coelophysis, and so people who know their paleo art history, Doug Henderson, who enormous numbers of both scientists and artists regard as one of the best paleo artists of all time, and by a margin. It's that classic Knight, Burian, and then Henderson is like in that discussion. I have a Henderson original of a coelophysis. It's absolutely magnificent. But Doug did this whole series of illustrations of Ghost Ranch, this famous find of, dozens, if not hundreds of specimens of coelophysis in a single locality.
It's the only place.
Yeah, I mean, there are bits of them in other places. We've definitely talked about this when we had Sky McDavid on. But yeah, these wonderful forest scenes with all these coelophysis in and these masses of animals. And so this is a very deliberate and specific tribute to that. We've used his colour scheme because he had these really red heads on them. So it's a very Henderson-esque scene of this really big, almost like redwood forest with a couple of dozen animals in it, and using his colour scheme, but drawn in not a more modern style, but now, there's serious questions. Are these animals filamented? So we've got them filamentous. And then the structure, I think, is actually a little like Mark Hallett, for those who know Mark Hallett's artwork, of lots of things dotted around. But the idea, this was one of the few areas where I asked, I didn't give instructions as in do a sketch for Gabriel, because you don't do that to Gabriel Agerto. But I did say, I want it to look a bit like this. And what I wanted was little clumps of animals doing all these different behaviours in different bits of the scene. So there's one having a dust bath. There's one jumping to try and catch a dragonfly going past. There's a couple that are fighting. There is one that is basically scratching itself. There is one that is going to the bathroom. There are a couple which are engaged in an activity normally reserved for adult coelophysis. There's all this stuff going on to this one scene of these giant dark green trees with shafts of light, and it's just fantastic. And that was always intended to be the cover, because it's like, here is all behaviour. You've got a social group, and they're interacting, and they're all doing all the different things that animals. Well, there's one asleep, so they're all doing things. Yeah, we're really pleased with that. And that's just the colour. Sorry, there's a bunch of black and white illustrations throughout the text as well, and quite a high number of photos, mostly of animals. So there's not that many specimens, because, again, while I do want animal behaviour people to read this, they also tend to be specialists on certain areas, and so even they might not be familiar with lots of esoteric examples of various different things. But I think it's probably, on average, more for paleontologists. And so showing them either often just symbol examples, but, it's just nice to have illustrations of things like, there's a lovely photo photo I got from Bruce Lauer of a pair of cheetah with a warthog just walking right past them. And it's just that classic, just because you're a herbivore and there's a carnivore there doesn't mean there must be carnage and blood flying.
I've seen The Lion King and Simba and Pumbaa got on.
Yeah, they got on great. Yeah, so it's fine. Rob Nell sent me a photo of a proboscis monkey in relatively deep water, and they're good swimmers and spend a lot of time in water in a way that other monkeys don't, but there's nothing in their anatomy that would suggest that. So it's just an example of the kind of thing that can be really easy for us to misinterpret or miss based on the available data. So, just a kind of point about keeping an open mind or how we trace stuff. It's much, much more heavily illustrated than any of my previous books, both in terms of photos and artwork, and then, a nice colour section, which is all art.
I quite like it as well, because it really sort of hammers home the point that, which a lot of people still miss, very general public people still miss, that dinosaurs are just animals. I mean, this is a thing that they think of them as a separate category entirely.
Yeah, and they're absolutely not, and they would do all the different things that animals do, but it also means they're subject to the same general rules and the same general pressures. When you have a situation where both parents are required to invest in their offspring in order to have any chance of survival, you will tend to get mutual sexual selection, or a reduction in ornamentation and a reduction in general sex differences because they have to contribute collectively. That's pretty much just how that works. And so when we've talked about, I've certainly talked in the past and written a whole bunch of papers about sexual dimorphism, cryptic sexual dimorphism, mutual sexual selection. Can we detect all this stuff? That's really interesting, and that's absolutely work we should have done and work we should continue to do. But something I don't think we've really looked at is, can we take a look at the conditions, or can we attempt to work something out about how these animals might be growing, which might give you an indication of the level of investment from parents? Is there some kind of threshold that could be passed in terms of that, above which it would require both parents, and therefore we can have another level of argument? And this is where I do really want to fold in the modern behaviorists, because I've had this frustration as someone who's really interested in this stuff for a long time, where I look at some things like that and go, we should be able to work that out. There should be a rule of thumb. It's never going to be perfect, all the variation that's out there, but there should be a rule of thumb about if X, then Y. And you try and find it in the scientific literature, and you realize that everyone kind of recognizes this, but no one's actually tried to work it out. Because if you want to know, you just look. I can just look at this animal and go, well, there's mum and dad both looking after the babies, or there's dad helping to build the nest and brood, but the instant they hatch, he runs off, and that's the end of his investment. I can see it. Why would I try and work out they're not trying to work out what's driving it, but where's the tipping point, or why does it work here and not there? There's very, very little of that going on.
I find it very surprising that there is, because in my head, and obviously, because I sort of see animals as separate things. I see a cat is like this, a dog is like that. And the fact that there'll be a similar driving force that affects the way that they'll both, have their offsprings, I find very interesting, that there might be these sort of laws which say if X then Y, or X then Y is more likely in behaviour. I find that really fascinating.
And again, we work a lot of that out. So like, as I say, for example, mutual sexual selection and mutual investment, you can see where there is mutual investment, you tend to get mutual sexual selection. But can you work out the point at which the level of investment is enough for that to kick in? I don't think anyone's tried to do. And yet we have vast amounts of data on this kind of stuff. Or we simply have enough living species that we know would do it, that we can try and calculate their degree of investment and go from there. But yeah, it's surprising how hard that is to do. I actually tried to do something I had a student a few years ago and got together with Ben Garrett, who I know a bit because he's a primatologist by background, looking at this in primates and just trying to find data on male primate investment in the raising of their offspring. It just didn't say. It said males do or don't, just nothing was written. And it was, infuriating, because it's like, well, surely there's, particularly when you've got like real groups like gorillas, it's like, no, I don't, males aren't doing a lot of babysitting and things like this, and they're certainly not foraging and feeding kids. But you can just observe them in the wild or in zoos. You just see it on documentaries. And yeah, there's a big silverback chewing away on something, and one of the kids nudges him and shakes it, and he'll hand it over. And it's like, okay, that's a little bit of help in a way that for some other species, that wouldn't happen. Like, I doubt baboons do that very much, given how they usually operate, for example. I think it's more likely the baby baboon would be clubbed around the head and sent howling, and it wouldn't even have tried to beg in the first place.
This is a problem that I think is across academics. I've recently written a book about ancient Egypt, and one of the things that leaps out at you is that none of the ancient Egyptians wrote down how to mummify people.
Yeah, because everyone knew.
That was never... Exactly, everybody knew. It was a normal thing to do. They wrote down how to mummify a cow, because you only did that once every 30 years or so, the lifespan of a cow, so they needed to know. But this is the thing. When you can see it, why write it? It's so irritating.
Yeah, or they just don't consider it. So I remember when I was trying to do a lot of my early predatory stuff, and not even necessarily early, like even 5 or 6 years ago, I sent out another batch of emails where I was finding papers, lots of papers studying stuff in Africa, and they were cataloguing things like lion kills and hyena kills. Like, what species were they killing, and what, carcasses that had been found, and trying to attribute them to different predators. Lots and lots of interesting stuff about prey preferences and yada, yada, yada. But of course, what I want to know is what was it? You've got a list, and it says Impala 73. How many of them were young? How many of them were mid-sized? How many of them were adult females? And how many of them were adult males? Because an adult male Impala is a very different animal to a newborn, or very different to a yearling. And obviously males and females have all these different selective pressures. And as far as I can tell, none of that data was ever collected. There wasn't even an attempt. I emailed a whole bunch, like a good number of academics, because there's quite a few people involved in papers like this, going, please, do you have that data, and you just haven't published it because you lumped it together? Please tell me you collected it. If you didn't, can you start collecting it? Because it's incredibly informative and important, arguably for your own research, because frankly, I think just lumping Impala together, or they do it with things like buffalo. It's like a baby buffalo is really different kettle of fish to an adult bull. But also, this would be a massive source of data for my research, and lots of other people as well. And none of them ever replied, like ever.
Oh,
which is, that's quite bad, frankly, for, academics. Academics usually reply and just go, sorry, not going to do it. Sorry, can't do it. Sorry, too busy. Sorry, don't have time to respond properly. But to not a single one of, say, probably 20 people that I've emailed, some of them half a dozen times over about 10 years.
Did you have quite a spammy address at the time? It could have been spam.
No, coming out of my uni address. But again, it's that sort of thing where, when we're now trying to feed into dinosaur stuff, and particularly with, I've written lots of stuff about predation on juveniles versus predation on adults, and size separator or size determinate predator-prey interactions. And it turns out that, I've read papers where they're like, here's a record of 2,500 lion kills, and it's just by species. This is incredibly frustrating, and it will go up to and including things like elephant, and you're like, again, an adult bull versus a calf. A lion ate an elephant, but boy, the difference between those two is monumental.
Juvenile lion goes after adult bull elephants.
Well, right. But then when you've got things like giraffe, which we've definitely talked about before, because bulls are basically solitary. So they're way more vulnerable, even though they're big. So actually knowing how much they're getting targeted versus, young babies, which are vulnerable simply because of their size, is really, really interesting stuff, particularly when we've got really good giraffe population data. We have got places where we know how many bulls, how many cows, how many calves per year per cow, how long they take to get to adult. And we've got a record of all the ones which have been killed by lion and hyena and leopard and hunting dog, and there's no sex or age on any of it.
Because I suppose it would, if you'd found, for example, you had a lot of instances where you have Tyrannosaurus of some species and it's only the large males that are getting targeted, it would suggest that they're looking after the juveniles because they're in a group situation, and that the predators and other, adults are just fighting. It's just the males that are fighting.
Well, in giraffes, it's because they're itinerant, because they're moving from female cluster to try and find reproductive females. And again, that's the kind of thing I don't think we've looked at in dinosaurs. That partly happens with giraffe because females are in estrus relatively brief periods and can breed year-round. Well, are dinosaurs capable of breeding year-round? Or are they limited to a breeding season? Because if they are, that completely changes the dynamic. And it probably wouldn't work. And you'd probably be better off in a harem system as a male if you knew there was going to be this 2 or 4 week window where the females are in estrus. There's no point chasing from group to group to group because you might not find any. In fact, you probably get absolutely nowhere. Whereas finding a gang of 5 that you can hold together and keep the other males away suddenly becomes very effective. So yeah, again, having an understanding of how systems like modern systems work and then trying to find a new route into the paleo data that might reveal that. I don't know enough about medullary bone and growth rings and isotopes of eggshells and isotopes of embryos and hatchlings to look at this stuff. But I think there are people who do, and I suspect they'd be very interested to know, is this egg laying seasonal or is it year round? But I don't think they'd necessarily know. That might link to the reproductive system of the adults, and that might tell you something about their social structure, intraspecific combat, intraspecific signaling, again, potentially mutual parental investment. We can get some leads on that from something like isotope data of embryos to say, do they appear at multiple times of year or are they all appearing in summer? And that's where I think we're missing big chunks of what we can realistically do. And so that is the kind of call to arms bit of the book of, hey, dinosaur people, dig into these areas because believe it or not, we can do something more with that. And behavior people, you know how you've been looking at all these different areas. Can we try and group them into two? Is there a fundamental split here, or is there a point at which greyish white and darkish grey, there's actually a split or a tipping point, or at least we can say you're definitely on the white side or you're definitely on the black side, depending on X or Y, because then we might be able to actually go and dig that out. And yeah, that's what the book's about, I guess.
Nice. It's basically, if you're thinking about doing a PhD in paleontology or in zoology, here's some ideas.
I mean, I'd really like to think that there's at least, bits of this where people will go, we've already got that data. I didn't realise we could do this with it. Or we've got that data. If we just go and get that bit, we can now go and solve this. It doesn't have to just be a PhD. I'm sure there are masters and undergraduate projects that would generate some of this data. I know people who've done that kind of thing. Melly During, who we had on a couple of months ago, doing stuff for her undergrad, which has, turned into levels and levels above what I think people would have guessed at the time. And it's similar here. Like I said, the primate stuff, we didn't get very far with it. But that was an undergrad research project, just trawling the literature, seeing if we could pull this stuff together. And frustratingly, we couldn't really, but at the same time, it gives you a place to go with it.
So what is your favourite chapter? Which bit of behaviour are you most interested in, do you think?
At this point, probably the signalling stuff, because I've just written so much about sexual selection, sexual dimorphism, mutual sexual selection, what it means at various different ways, what it tells you about signaling and communication and the evolution of signaling traits, which then explains a bunch of other stuff. And again, even I haven't been able to push that very far. Stuff like territory holding. What does that mean for resources? What does that mean for local environments? Can we pull that stuff together? There's still so much more that can come out of that and really try and build this Gestalt knowledge, because it sounds trivial, but again, all of this stuff intersects because behavior it's one of those things where it's like, it's obviously fundamental. I mean, obviously the idea that, lizards didn't behave or dinosaurs didn't behave. Yes, of course they behaved. Extinct things had behavior. They had ecology. They sat in ecosystems and they did things and were also influenced by other things in that system. That's very, very obvious, but we do also tend to tackle it in incredibly niche ways. And on the one hand, I totally understand that. I'm doing a study of tyrannosaur jaw mechanics or hadrosaur jaw mechanics, and I'm trying to work out how did the teeth bite and what did they bite and how were they regenerating and yada, yada, yada. And the conclusion will often be, well, it looks like they're eating a lot of really tough plants. and that's why their teeth are shedding so quickly or something like this. And it's like, okay, great. But what does that mean? Because now if they look like they've got a real specialization on really tough plants, well, what about the others? Are there other things in that ecosystem that are focusing on really tough plants? No. Well, then they're probably kind of specialists. What does the paleontological data look like in terms of the frequency of these plants? Are they rare? Are they common? If they're common, that might explain if the species was doing very well. If the plants are common but the animals aren't, what's stopping them from being more numerous? If there's a ton of food and they're the only things eating it, well, why aren't there more of them? If those plants are rare, okay, that might explain why the population is small. But then, are they in clusters? Do you get like groves? Are there areas where there's loads and areas, much bigger areas where there's none? Or is it like a forest where 1 in every 50 trees is one of these? Because again, that would totally change the dynamic of how that dinosaur fundamentally lived. If they're in groves,
migration,
they've got to hang around they're either hanging around in one area and not moving very much at all, or they're going to feed in an area and move a long way. Feed in an area, move a long way. And those two different things you could probably tell anatomically, or at least you could have a look at it. And the alternative is if it's spaced out, they're going to be moving constantly. And then they almost certainly won't be in large groups. Because if you're only moving from tree to tree to tree, you do not want to be hanging around with 20 mates, all of whom want to eat that one tree when you get to it. So that probably tells you something about them. Right, well, if you now know they're solitary, that's going to change how they communicate with each other. That's going to change things like sexual selection. That's going to, you might get pairs. You might be like a gibbon-orang system where it's just a male-female, though I think that'd be very unusual. I can't think of, loads of birds do that, but I can't think of any reptiles that do off the top of my head. But it's at least plausible. Or alternatively, you might be looking for some kind of lecking system or some kind of, even unornamented. So because these animals are only coming across each other occasionally, just being big and healthy is the kind of thing that might attract a female rather than necessarily having to go for a big display. But we can look at that.
I'm just going to clarify what lecking is, because it's what some birds do, don't they? They have sort of, the leck is something that they come and the males fight each other. Is that right?
Well, it's they display usually. So yeah, so the in the UK we have grouse and capercaillie do it. The example, so cock of the rock in South America, the beautiful bright orange little kind of parroty things. They're not parrots. Some birds of paradise do this, where basically, all the males and females get together and all the males are displaying how great they are and all the females are basically just watching, and then they try and pick the best male out of that. But as I say, there are exceptions to this rule. You want to dig into it. But like I say, I think we're looking at things where we stop with, well, I've worked out the diet of this animal, and then just kind of stop. And again, it all feeds in together, and starting to pull at these threads, again, both on the behavior side and on the fossil side, and bring them together can give us, I think we probably have an awful lot of data, or with not much effort, we can get an awful lot of data that would really help us start digging into things like this. And all we got to do is realize it and sort it out.
You're basically acting like a paleo artist, because a paleo artist has to read a lot of separate different papers to work out what an animal actually looked like. Because, one, paleontologist is going to look just at their sort of like leg movement and dynamics. Another one's going to look just at their skin and what it was like. Another one's going to look at their jaw size and where you're finding them and their groupings.
There's definitely a large element of that. I think where that analogy breaks down a little bit is the variation in behavior, because, all antelope look fundamentally quite similar to each other. And yet the difference between harem species, lek species, solitary species, those that live in pairs or those that live in small groups versus those that live in big groups. And then you have things like wildebeest and buffalo, which look like they're in a giant herd, but actually it's a giant herd of lots of little herds operating together. That kind of stuff you won't see from the kind of things that you look at.
And also the same species will act in different ways depending on the environmental circumstance.
That's exactly where I was going next. So yeah, the one I always bring up on this is the wildebeest. Every Attenborough documentary for since I was a young, small child. It's like, and here's the million wildebeest migration from the Masai Mara Serengeti, and they go across the river and all the crocodiles eat them. And we've seen it again and again and again and again and again. And then I go to South Africa at the same time and they're just standing around. And it's like, well, why are they standing around? Oh, they don't migrate here. It's a couple of thousand miles away and it's the same species. And they just, well, the females will move a bit, but the males basically sit on a territory and starve. That's their plan, is this is a good territory, I'm going to hold it. So I'm just not going to, well, not eat, but there's very, very little to eat. But my much better strategy is occupying this spot so I've got it when the things improve, and then the females are gonna need to come here to feed, and then I've got them. So yeah, completely different behavioural strategies. Entirely, climate determined, basically. And again, we do, not unreasonably, but we'll go, oh, well, we looked at these hadrosaurs in China, and then we looked at these hadrosaurs in Mexico, and then we looked at these ones in Canada, and they're all kind of the same, so they're all doing the same thing. And it's like, no. Or, Edmontosaurus, Myosaura, Myosaura does this. Myosaura there did that at that time, probably because there's a whole bunch of environmental triggers we haven't even thought to look at or looked at, or even if we had looked at, we wouldn't necessarily know what they mean, that would probably drive different bits of, the mating cycle and how many nests they make and how many eggs they lay and how much investment they'll put into their offspring. It's similar. Talked about sexual dimorphism lots. I remember finding this great paper. I think the author's name was King, but he'd surveyed population differences in sexual dimorphism in reptiles, in particular in North America. But there was one that always struck out, and it was one of these random pond turtles. I can't remember which. It doesn't really matter. And in most places, males were like 20 to 30% bigger than females. But in one location, females were on average 50% bigger than males. And they're just clearly under some kind of local selection where probably there's like limited resources. So maximizing your number of eggs is really important. Oh, sorry, there's really high predation. So maximizing your number of eggs is really important to have enough to survive. So maximizing number of eggs, you need to be as big as possible. So rather than growing quickly and laying a few eggs every year, grow slowly, get really big, and then lay tons of eggs, and you're more likely to have offspring. That's probably what's happening. It's probably something as simple as a different local predator. But we would absolutely measure that population and then go, in ankylosaurs, females are 50% bigger than male. And it's not that at all. It's like this subpopulation of this species at this time, for probably quite a well understood ecological reason, is doing that.
This sounds like a book that you want.
It sounds like a book. Excellent. Thank you very much.
It does. It does sound like a proper book. It sounds good. I mean, it's not got much of a story though, and the main characters are a bit, it's disparate. But
I like
a
car chase. Yes.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, I'm genuinely proud of it, and not that I'm not proud of my previous books, but this is the sort of thing I've been wanting to write for a long time. And as I say, anyone who's kept up with the podcast, and even worse, anyone who's read a ton of my papers, this really is something I've been working on for the best part of 20 years, like our understanding of ecology, our understanding of behavior, how they fit, trying to bring some understanding of living animals into our understanding of paleontology, because I think as a field we're incredibly poor at that. And this is, as I say, it's not a book of what Dave thinks, because there's 400 references in there. And
I noticed that. I was thinking the references are there so you can go, this is, I'm not pulling I'm not making it up. Yeah, any part of my anatomy.
But it really is the kind of a fair amount of a synthesis of my research and my ideas and where I've been trying to go with this stuff. And again, with a massive background of all the scientific literature that's gone into it. I say all, while we've got a side note, I basically finished writing this like early 2023, and then, although it's been revised, couldn't really update it. So there is a ton of papers from like the last 18 months, which I would have absolutely cited had they come out a bit earlier. But instead are just left by the wayside. So the book is slightly dated, and I think it's got like 2 2024 and about 10 2023 references in it, and there's a lot of cool new stuff. I don't think it overturns anything I said, but it's very annoying when I was like, yeah, the only paper I could really find on this was from like the 80s, and then one comes out after I've signed off on it. So apologies.
That will always be the case, though.
It will, but this has had a really long lead time, which has made it worse. Other than numbered references has made it worse because it's so much harder to change. Whereas just dropping in an extra name in a sentence is the difference. Whereas dropping in a new reference 7 now means that 393 references need to be updated and checked. But yeah, it's, as I say, it really is a kind of collective of not my ideas, but my take on our understanding of dinosaur behaviour and ecology. And I was going to say high hopes is probably pushing it. I genuinely have a real hope that this will prove somewhat foundational going forward. I like to think this is the kind of thing that a bunch of people are going to read and go, yeah, he's right. We can do this stuff. We should change how we're doing this. We need to bring this stuff together.
I mean, you might get a load of people like me just go, oh, that looks like a lot of effort, Dave. I'll just carry on.
But yes, if you're interested in behaviour, if you're interested in ecology, whether that's living animals or extinct animals, I think you will genuinely get something out of this. It really is pitched at that kind of very interested amateur or undergraduate master's level is the kind of the tone, I think.
If you've listened to at least 5 episodes of this podcast, you're going to love it.
But again, I know academics listen to this podcast, and yeah, I've had academics, as I said, a bunch of people have read it and gone, wow, that's a really good idea. Wow, I hadn't thought about that. So it isn't just it isn't just a review. It's a bunch of reviews, but it's not just a review of the state of the art. I really think it's bringing ideas together and trying to push it in a new direction and showing people where we can go.
Bunch of people who listen to this podcast, Dave, like Izzy, and think she's nice and like her contributions, though, and getting you to go rawr, etc. So you can write your own book
for them.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I've got a book out. It's called The Cursed Tomb. It's on ancient Egypt. I've had 2 Egyptologists looking at it, so the story is very, very accurate. If you're interested, if you're aged between 9 and 12, you can, you'd like that. If you're not, it's just a normal book, but I don't put any kissing in it, so it's okay for kids. That's the rule I do.
My book's got coelophysis shagging on the cover.
Yeah, and defecating. That's what I'm really liking. You're releasing a book with like defecation and reproduction on the cover. Well done, Dave.
Excellent stuff.
All right, then. Well, until next time, do go out and please do. If you know a local bookshop, just go to them and order it in for you. They'd be absolutely delighted. Support local bookshops. If not, and you do want to get it off a big site like Amazon, please do, once you read the book, give it a review, because that will help Dave reach more people who will be interested in that sort of stuff. And until next time, shall we say rawr?
Rawr.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Terrible Lizards. You are amazing. If you're a patron, you're double amazing. You can support the show by going to patreon.com/Terrible Lizards, or just go to terriblelizards.co.uk and follow the links. If a bunch of extra content and having your questions answered doesn't appeal, you can always support the show by leaving us a review. Please do share it with your friends. It does make a massive difference. And if you want to support either Dave or myself individually, please go to our respective websites, davehone.co.uk or iszi.com. You can get our books. Mine have got nothing to do with dinosaurs. But anyway, squawky bye-bye.